Hello, welcome back to my channel. Today we are not doing a Herkiat recommendations video. I bet you didn't see that one coming. Instead we are doing the mid-year freakout tag, because this is the middle-ish of the year, and it's time to have a little look at how the reading year has been going so far. This tag has been around for ages. I got the questions from Becca and the books, but a lot of creators have been doing it. Some of them put their own spin on it because, like I said, the tag has been around for ages. I think it was originally posted by Chami, and I don't think they post anymore, but yeah. Let's just get right into it. As you can see, I have pulled up The Everlasting by Alex E. Harrow, because we are jumping straight into it with the best book so far. Like, that's a question. So the best book so far for me has been The Everlasting. I read this book in March, and I think it's potentially my only 5-star book still, and as you can tell, it wasn't quite a 5-star. I don't remember why, but basically we have this historian, Owen, who gets a chance of a lifetime when this lost manuscript appears, but he is somewhat surprised when he is sent back in time to actually write this manuscript himself, and make sure that this story about Una Everlasting, knight back in the day, plays out as it's supposed to. I really enjoyed the book, obviously, since I gave it 4.75 stars. We mostly hear from Owen, and he is not afraid to picture himself as a coward, even though as the book progresses we figure out that he's not really a coward at all. And sometimes we hear from Una when the story gets too hard for Owen to tell, and then in the middle there's a bit where it's hard for both of them to tell the story, and that's told like a fairy tale, and I think that's where I lost interest a little bit, because I couldn't really feel the connection to Owen and Una through this section of the book. I do love a story that plays with time, but it can get a little bit boring if you have the same time loop again and again and again. But this one was done really well, because they go back in time and they try to make sure that history happens in a certain way, but instead of, hearing the same thing again and again, we get more about the other things, like their thoughts about this and the result of those many time travels, and why this is happening and how this is happening, and they try to do something completely different than just change one little bit. And even the ending, I wasn't sure how it was gonna end, because it wasn't like very obvious that it would be a happy ending. And yeah, it was just it could very easily go either direction, so I won't spoil it for you, but it's really, really good book. Then for another really, really good book, we have Pale Rider, about the Spanish flu of 1918 and how it changed the world. This is a non-fiction book about the Spanish flu, obviously. And this was a recommendation on like a totally different book on the library app. I couldn't really tell how this book was connected to the other book. I can't even remember what it was now, but it was quite different. But this looked so interesting, so I borrowed it on a whim, and it was really, really good. Like I said, it's about the Spanish flu and how it affected the world. Let's see. So it talked about more personal histories at the time, how science was evolving, art and psychology, and what we can learn about an epidemic like this. And I thought that was really interesting because this book is written in 2017, and obviously in 2020, COVID-19 happened. And that's probably the epidemic that has been most similar in, scope and spread to the Spanish flu. And I also learned a lot of things. Like, I always thought that the Spanish flu was after World War One. I feel like whenever you see it in fiction, you always see the war ending and then the flu coming and just like decimating everyone. But actually, the Spanish flu was well underway in the middle of 1918, and probably the war had something to do with the virulence and the spread of this flu, because obviously troops are moving, conditions are not great, so the virus can spread really easily. And probably it also had something to do with how the war ended and the peace negotiations and stuff. And I always thought of the Spanish flu as something in the Western world for some reason. But there were actually a lot of very high infection and death numbers in India and Korea and places in Africa. So that was really interesting too. And she talked about how at the time, like when it was over, there wasn't really a lot of attention on this major thing that happened. Like, for example, in art and science, there wasn't a lot of research done about it. And I feel like it's a little bit the same for COVID. Like, we were in it, and then when it was over, we were just like, move on. So it's interesting to see if in 100 years from now we'll have like a resurgence of interest in COVID like there has been for the Spanish flu in these years. The next question is the best sequel so far, and I have read a couple. Obviously, I read the Hunger Games 2 and 3 in this book, Catching Fire and Mockingjay, and those are just like 5-star all around all the time. But other than that, because those were rereads, so other than that, I did read Murder on the Marlow Bill. This is number 4 in the Marlow Murder Club mystery, and this is about 3 women, Judith, Susie, and Bex, who always end up embroiled in these mysteries that happen in the little town of Marlow. And this one is set on a boat, and I thought the mystery was really interesting. All the people involved had motive and opportunity, so it wasn't really obvious who done it or who didn't do it. But as we move along, all the clues are things that we have seen and witnessed along with these 3 women. So if you wanted to, you probably could, do some sleuthing yourself, but I'm not really the type of person to try to figure out the mystery. I just go with the flow, and I'm happy to have a reveal at the end. I think especially in this one, it became quite obvious that the writer has these 3 women in the group, and they're quite different. So Judith is like a crossword puzzler, really cerebral and smart. Bex is a vicar's wife who wants something more in her life, and Susie is a dog walker and just trying to hustle and live her life. And every time there's a clue, at least one person in the group needs explaining why this clue is important, and that means that the reader also gets an explanation, which I appreciate, but some people might think it's too easy, if you will. Then I also read A Prayer for the Crown Shy, which is the second book in the Monk and Robot duology, and we are following Dex and Moscap, and they have emerged from the woods, and Moscap, who is the robot in this story, meet humanity basically in all these different towns they are visiting. And on the road there are a lot of existential questions and both Dix and Moscap have to think about their own places in the universe. And this is probably one of the worlds that I would prefer to live in if I had to pick a world to be transported into, because it just seems so cozy. It's very like solar punk, recycle, reduce, reuse, socialistic. Yeah, so I like the future that Becky Chambers has imagined, and I also really enjoy both Dix and Moscap as characters. And Dix has these issues about what they can give to the world and what they owe the world, and Moscap is meeting the world for the first time, and they are just so curious and helpful, but at the same time not afraid to say what they need and like put a foot down if they have some boundaries. So that's really good. I did note here in my notes or in my review that I'm not sure that I understood the end, other than if we think that other people get to rest without having to earn it, or that other people can get help without giving equally, then that should also apply to ourselves. So like we can rest without earning it, and we can ask for help without measuring up if we are giving as good as we're getting. Yeah, but definitely worth the read, this entire duology. So if you haven't read it yet, please go do so. The next question is a new release you need to read, and I really want to read What Stalks the Deep by T. Kingfisher. This is the third one in the Sworn Soldier series, and I really enjoy this series. The first one is What Moves the Dead, and the second one is What Haunts... oh god, what's it called? The second one is called What Feasts at Night, and this is like gothic horror novellas, and I really enjoy them. And I think it's kind of funny because I don't really read horror, but T. Kingfisher writes both horror and fantasy, and I love fantasy, but I don't really love T. Kingfisher's fantasy, but I do love T. Kingfisher's horror. So I don't know what it is about their writing style that just flips the switch for me, or like flips the fantasy horror preference for me. But anyway, I think, and when I say new release, I think this actually came out in October last year, so but I need to source all my books from the library, so it takes a while before I can get them usually, so still waiting on that one. Then we have an anticipated release, and I am so excited about Victorious by V.E. Schwab. I think it's still a couple of months away from releasing, but this is the third one in the Vicious series, where basically Eli and Victor figure out that some people can get superpowers if they have a near-death experience. So they basically kill each other and bring each other back to life, and then they earn these superpowers. And there's also a lot of commentary about like who should regulate these superpower people. Should they be regulated? Like, are they still people? What kind of rights do they have? Yeah, so I'm really excited about this one. It is the third one, and I think the first two were published years and years ago, so I didn't really imagine that there would be a third one. I thought the duology was finished, but it seems like this has been in the works for a couple of years at least, if not since the publication of the first two. But yeah. Then we have Biggest Disappointment, and that is definitely Court of Wanderers. This is the second book to a Silver Under Nightfall, and I read that a couple of years ago now, and it was my favorite book of that year. 5 stars. I loved it so much. So I had been so excited to read the second one, and I hated it. Yeah, we are just following Xiaodan, Remy, and Malek while they are trying to fight this evil Night Empress and this new infection that can turn people and vampires into monsters that are basically impossible to kill. But my issues with the book is just the plot was so boring and so confusing, and it just dragged on and on and on, and there was always something going on that was super hard to follow. And I feel like the writing style was bad. And I don't remember it being like that in the first one, so I don't know what happened. Like, maybe it has been a couple of years since I read the first one, so maybe it was, and it just worked better for me at the time, but I don't know. But like in this book, the grammar and the syntax was just off, and like sometimes there was a word missing, and sometimes the syntax just made me think of like a fan fiction writer whose first language isn't English. And that's not to say that's a bad thing, but supposedly this book had an editor, so I feel like it could have been better. And oftentimes the dialogue was really hard to follow because there was so many times where you couldn't really figure out who was saying what, and then it's really hard to imagine the scene in your head. And like this is also a why choose three-way romance, and I really enjoyed the relationship in the first book, and obviously it continued in this book, but now the relationship has been established, so some of the excitement has died down, and often when we heard about this relationship it was kind of smutty, which is not really my thing. Like, it wasn't super graphic, but still not quite what I wanted. Yeah, like I said, it was just so confusing and so hard to follow, so every time I put it down, I just didn't want to pick it up again, and that was so disappointing because, like I said, this was the follow-up to a 5-star read, so yeah. Now, I did finish Court of Wanderers, but another big disappointment was The Sword of Kaigen, because this had just been so hyped for so long, and it looked like a really good chunky standalone fantasy that you could just like sink your teeth into, but I really didn't like it, so I ended up DNFing it at page 157. Also because I looked up reviews when I was like deciding if I wanted to DNF or not, and people said it got better in the end, but then it felt like it was setting up for a book 2 that is never gonna come, because there was an author's note that said that she has left this world behind, so she's probably not gonna what's it called, write more in it. So I was like, well, if it's just gonna leave me hanging, then I don't want to spend my time doing this. But basically we follow Mamoru, who's a 14-year-old boy, and I've written down, that's just an age I don't want to hear about. Okay. And it also felt like he was much younger, but then there would be like some sort of comment that made it clear that he was actually very much older. But I think I felt like he was like 10 to 12 at the beginning. And I just couldn't really get into the world either, because it's like this samurai-esque Japanese-inspired society, but then suddenly there are like comm devices, TV, and jet airplanes, and it just felt like really awkward for those two to mix. Like the samurai part was really well described and atmospheric, and then when the modern part was mentioned, it was just like really jarring. And we also heard from Mamoru's mother, and that was just really depressing because she was depressed. But obviously there's room for improvement. I don't know what you would say, but it was just so depressing to read, and on other reviewers it sounded like it didn't really get any better. And I feel like I gave it 150 pages, but there was not really a lot of stuff happening. Like, there wasn't a lot of plot, there's just a lot of world building and none of the stuff really spoke to me. So yeah, another big disappointment. Then we have the biggest surprise, and I took this as like a positive surprise. So first up, I have the Apothecary Diaries, which is a manga series. I've only read the first volume, but I read it for Herkiet for Choose Your Party, for like an apothecary. And I usually don't read manga or graphic novels because my brain just cannot fill in all the stuff that's missing. You know, all the exposition and the feelings of people. And so usually I find them quite superficial and boring. Just because my brain isn't wired to read that type of text. But this one actually had a bit more text, both in the like what people were thinking, and there was also a little bit of like narration almost. So I feel like I could follow along more than usual. And I also really liked the plot. I will say this is a mystery, and on page 177 of a manga, the main character has already solved 2 mysteries, which was like moving along quite quickly. But yeah, I was pleasantly surprised that I liked a manga. Another pleasant surprise was the Other Post by Emily J. Taylor. This I read for Herkiet 2 for the awards ceremony prompt, because I picked the Young Adult Goodreads Fantasy Awards, and this was on there. So it wasn't really on my radar other than that, and I was like, well, we'll give it a go. But it was actually really good, and I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. And this is about Maeve, who's just trying to keep a low profile because her father is a pariah. But she gets this, because of something he did way back when, she gets this old letter in the mail that he might be innocent. So she decides to try to solve this case and clear his name. And I really enjoyed this book because the characters were interesting, they had a good development, and the story itself, like the plot, was also really interesting. I did feel like the ending was a little... I didn't really know how to feel, because there was a very short time left, but still a lot of loose ends to tie up. But then that happened by other characters telling Maeve what happened instead of us experiencing it with her. And at first I felt like that was kind of easy, but when I thought about it, I was like, actually maybe it's okay, because we enjoyed all the plot and the action along with Maeve. And then I think she was sick or something in the end, and then other characters told her like all the consequences of what had happened. So that was fine, that we didn't have to like wade through all of that ourselves. And I feel like it was kind of the same but reverse in Emily Wilde's book, the third one, where all the action was told to us because it happened somewhere else, and then we experienced all the consequences with Emily, and that was really boring. So I feel like experiencing the action was good, and then the consequences could be like in a postscript or something. So yeah, that was a pleasant surprise. And then the next question is your favorite new author, and I definitely say I want to look into more of Emily J. Taylor's writing. I think she has one more book that did sound okay, interesting, but yeah, I think this is, because I think the other one, it looked a little bit like middle grade, so I'll definitely keep an eye on what she comes out with next. And then I also discovered Alice Roberts. I read Crypt and gave it 4 or 5 stars, I believe. And it was really interesting. She's a professor, I believe, of archaeology, and I used to be an archaeologist, so that was really interesting. And like I said, I read Crypt and really enjoyed it, and then I have bought another book of hers, Buried, because it does seem like all her books are topics that I would be really interested in. So I'm excited to explore more of her work. And then as for a favorite character, oh yeah, this is the other book by Emily J. Taylor, Hotel Magnifique. I don't really know if that's for me, but I mean, it does say basically the same, tags as the other web posts, so I should probably try that one out. Yeah, favorite character is definitely Owen from The Everlasting. I just loved him and the way he was, like, he was so loyal and dedicated, and yeah, loved him. Now, a book that made you cry, I'm dead inside, so I don't really cry a lot at books, but definitely The Hunger Games can always, tug at my heartstrings a little bit. This was rereads for me, but still really amazing books. I think I read them first, like, back when they were quite new, and then I think I reread them like a year or two later, and obviously watched the movies when they came out. But I haven't really consumed any original trilogy content lately, but I did read Hunger Games last year, and then I read these two this year, and loved them. I mean, they hold up still, and I agree with Jack Edwards that Hunger Games is a modern classic. Just putting it out there. And then a book that made me happy. I really enjoyed Paladin's Grace by T. Kingfisher, and I know I just said I don't enjoy her fantasy. But in this one I did. I think the fantasy that I have mostly read from her has been like the shorter stuff, and I don't really vibe with that, and I don't know if it's just because it's the shorter stuff. But this was like a full-length novel, and it is a series, but I'm not sure if we are following. This follows Stephen and Grace, and how they meet, and I'm not sure if the other books are following them as well, or if we follow other characters. But anyway, really enjoyed this. I loved Stephen, and T. Kingfisher does good, like, banter and has a really dry sense of humor, I think, so that is on par with my sense of humor. So yeah, so really enjoyed this one. Basically this is about a paladin whose god has died, so now he's just like flailing in life, trying to figure out what he's supposed to live for since his god is no longer existing. And he meets Grace, who is a perfume maker, and at the back of it there's this plot about a murderer going around town decapitating people, and we follow as all these threads get wound together. I did feel like there's another plot as well, which is this visiting prince from out of state, and he gets poisoned, and then Grace is charged with poisoning him. And I felt like that entire plot was a little bit filler, because why do we need both a decapitating murderer and a poisoning the prince plot? So I felt like that was a little bit much, but anyway. Then we have the most beautiful book you've bought, and I haven't really bought many books. I think I bought 2. But from the library, I got The Night and the Moth, and I really enjoyed this style of cover. Yeah, like, what can you say? It's just a beautiful cover. I do think there have been a lot of great covers this year. Then there is the best book to film adaptation, and I just like a week ago watched When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit, a German movie, and I just really loved it. It's based on a book by Judith Kerr, which is based on her own experience running from Hitler's Germany, and yeah, it was really amazing. Basically, it's about this family where the father is a Jew, but he's not a practicing Jew, but he's also a critic of society. And when Hitler first comes to power in the 30s, he realizes that he should probably try to protect himself and his family, so they flee Germany, and they end up, quite penniless. And they used to be quite affluent in Berlin, but obviously they have to leave everything behind because they need to get out fairly quickly when they decide to leave. And Anna, the little girl, she leaves behind this pink rabbit of hers because they are told that they can only bring like one toy and one book, and they need to skedaddle. So she leaves behind all her other things, including the pink rabbit, and she is just like wondering when she can return and reunite with this pink rabbit and all her other toys. Yeah, and we follow this family as they go to, I believe, Switzerland first, and then Paris and England, and just where they are just trying to survive in this society where they are not really wanted anywhere. They are trying to find jobs, trying to, just survive. And Anna is the star of the movie, and I really enjoyed her, like the what's called the actor's performance, because she was just so natural and engaging and really great. Like you could just see, her thoughts and feelings on her face, and and obviously it's also quite poignant because it spoke to the experience of refugees, both as the adults who like know what's going on, and also the kids that are like a little bit more, we'll just stay here for 2 weeks and then we can go back. But at some point, it's Anna's 10th birthday, I believe, and her dad are talking, and she says something like she doesn't enjoy this life of being a refugee, and he says, he thinks it's quite interesting because who's to say where they're gonna be on her 11th birthday or her 12th birthday. And I was like, because this is like mid 1930s, so it's going to be at least 10 years before they can return to Germany, if they can even return at that time. So and you're like, are you just trying to cheer up your child, or are you actually thinking that this is an interesting way of life? Anyway, definitely can recommend this film if you haven't seen it yet. And then finally, there are books you need to read by the end of the year, and Women Who Run with the Wolves is one I need to read, because I have been reading this for a year now, I think. I've started it like 3 times, and I haven't made it past the first couple of chapters because it's just so dense. So I tried finding like a follow along, explain it to me as we are reading kind of, either book club or reading guide or something, but I couldn't really find any, and then I just stopped. So I need to start again and then actually follow through, and I think this is going to be one of the ones where it's really dense and intense at first, and then hopefully it'll like loosen up once you get into it, and but this is also a classic in the feminism world, so I do want to read it, and it's time that I finish this book. And that is the tag. So let me know if how your reading year is going. If you have done this tag as well, I would love to have a little look-see at how you are doing. And I'll see you soon with another video. Bye!